The Galactic Council had been convening for over a century, but for all their advancements in diplomacy, culture, and technology, there was one glaring flaw that none of them dared admit: their utter contempt for humanity. The hundreds of species who made up the Council had been living in relative peace for millennia, and in that time they had come to view Earth as little more than a curiosity, a chaotic, young world full of contradictions and violent tendencies. They saw Earth's population as primitive, still squabbling among themselves over resources, religion, and politics. Earth, to the Council, was an insignificant backwater, a world that would never be able to catch up with the likes of the peaceful Elogi or the technologically superior Tenorans. On Elysium Station, the massive orbital hub that served as the Council's headquarters, the room was filled with the soft hum of chatter as delegates from various star systems filtered in for the day's session. The chamber was designed to be imposing, with vast windows showing the sprawling stars beyond and walls that gleamed like polished obsidian. The luminous holograms that floated above the Council's central podium displayed the flags of each member species, flickering gently as the delegates settled into their seats. At the center of it all was High Chancellor Marleran of the Jura, a massive, towering species known for their quiet wisdom and long lifespan. As always, her deep purple skin shimmered in the low light, and her antennae twitched ever so slightly, betraying her alertness. Her eyes, large and multifaceted, scanned the room with quiet authority. But even she, despite her centuries of experience, couldn't quite mask her disdain for the humans. "We are here today to discuss the recent developments in the Outer Rim," Marleran began, her voice rich and resonant, filling the chamber. "Reports have surfaced indicating that the Terran Alliance, humanity's dominant federation, has increased its military presence in regions once considered neutral, and they have begun to expand their territory at an alarming rate." Across the room, the various species began to murmur in concern. The report had come from a number of intelligence agencies, but none of the Council's core members believed it could be true. Earth had always been an unpredictable, combative species, but even their military might had been no match for the larger, more established empires of the galaxy. "Surely this is an exaggeration," said Thalra, the Androthian representative, his long silver tentacles flicking nervously. "Humans have always been disorganized, scattered. They could not have suddenly turned the tide so drastically." "You underestimate them," said Captain Elena Graves, the human delegate. She stood at the back of the room, hands clasped behind her back, her posture straight as an arrow. As a former military officer turned diplomat, Graves had always been the voice of reason among her people. "I assure you, the reports are accurate. The Terran Alliance has developed new weapons, advanced disruptive technologies that could rival anything the Council has at its disposal." The room fell silent. Graves had been the Council's contact with Earth for nearly a decade, and her warning had never been more urgent. A few years ago, humanity had been seen as little more than a curious, developing species with potential for self-destruction. Now she was speaking of a new threat, one no one had expected to come so soon. "I suggest we investigate this further before any drastic actions are taken," said Marleran, her voice colder than before. "We do not want to provoke the humans. Let us not forget their history of war and conflict. Their inability to maintain lasting peace could be the very thing that destroys them." There was murmuring of agreement from several of the more conservative species, the Acronians, with their long, spindly legs and sharp claws, the Vari, who lived in floating cities high above their homeworld, and the Yggdrasians, a species of gaseous entities who communicated in sonic pulses. They all shared Marleran's sentiment. Humanity was a wild card, but not a threat that needed immediate attention. "Perhaps it is time for us to remind Earth of their place," said Admiral Vranik, a hardened veteran of the Salvarian fleet, his scarred face contorted in a sneer. "We send them a message. Show them that they cannot simply decide for themselves where their influence reaches." A few of the more hawkish members nodded in agreement, but Thalra held up a tentacle. "Before we act on impulse, let us remember one thing. The Krill have been silent for too long, and their movements in the Outer Rim are becoming more pronounced. If humanity has managed to gain access to the Krill's technology, we may need them more than we think." The mention of the Krill, a fearsome ancient empire that had waged countless wars across the galaxy centuries ago, sent a ripple of unease through the room. The Krill were known for their savagery and advanced weaponry, and their fleets had long been a shadow over the peaceful systems. No one had expected the humans to face the Krill alone. If humanity had discovered a way to challenge them, the silence stretched. Everyone knew the Krill were returning, but few had prepared for what might happen if the humans were caught in the middle. Marloan cleared her throat, dismissing the growing tension. "The decision is simple. We send a diplomatic mission to Earth. We will speak to President Talbot and remind him of the consequences of humanity's actions." Graves' hand twitched. She had always been the pragmatist, but even she could sense the shift in the room. They were underestimating Earth once again. "Very well," she said quietly, "but remember, I warned you." With that, the Council agreed to dispatch an envoy to Earth, unaware that their decision would be the catalyst for a series of events that would forever change the fate of the galaxy. This opening sets the tone for both the political intrigue and the build-up to humanity's rise as a galactic power. It also introduces key players, including President Talbot and Captain Elena Graves, and hints at the larger existential threat posed by the Krill. The arrival of the Galactic Council's diplomatic envoy to Earth was supposed to be a simple formality. Captain Elena Graves had been instructed to oversee the meeting between the Council's representatives and President Jake Talbot. The intention was clear: to make sure humanity knew its place in the galaxy, to remind them of the Council's authority. The delegation expected to encounter a fractured, desperate Earth, a world still recovering from centuries of wars, political instability, and environmental collapse. But what they found was nothing like what they'd anticipated. The envoy ship, the Relian, docked in Earth's orbit, its sleek silver hull gleaming in the sunlight. Inside, Captain Graves stood at the front of the delegation, flanked by a mix of council members, Zerothians, Icronians, and the neutral Chur, all eager to assert their superiority over the humans. The Relian's sensors scanned Earth's surface, noting the massive cities and vast human populations sprawling across the continents. What struck them, though, was the unprecedented lack of chaos. Earth seemed composed. Even more than that, the human military was mobilized, and they were not hiding their readiness. The Council's intelligence had missed this fact entirely. The humans had learned the hard way that the galaxy was a dangerous place. No longer willing to be mere observers in galactic politics, they had grown increasingly isolationist, dedicating all their resources to securing their borders. The Krill, a race of ancient marauders who had slowly crept toward Earth for years, were now the primary focus of humanity's military agenda. Earth was a powder keg, and the envoy had just lit the fuse. "Captain, the Federation has agreed to meet us in Earth's capital," announced Roland, the Icronian delegate, his voice flat but tinged with apprehension. "We are to discuss the situation regarding their recent expansion." Graves nodded, her mind preoccupied with the strange unease she felt in her gut. "Prepare to land. Let's not keep them waiting." The moment the Council's ship entered Earth's atmosphere, an unexpected message crackled through the comms. It was a broadcast from Earth's military command, urgent and direct. To the Galactic Council delegation, the voice of President Jake Talbot boomed across the communication channel. "We know you've come to lecture us, but there's no time for diplomacy. You have 10 minutes to recall your fleet, or we will act. This is your final warning." Graves froze, eyes widening. This was not the message of a species pleading for recognition. It was a declaration of war. "Captain, are you seeing this?" Roland's voice echoed in her ear. "I'm seeing it. Prepare for immediate evasive maneuvers," Graves ordered, her heart racing. But before anyone could respond, the ship jolted violently. The Rillian shook under a massive impact, an explosion of electromagnetic energy blasting through the hull. The energy pulse came from Earth itself, a sharp focused beam that sent a ripple through the ship's systems, cutting off all communication with the outside world. "We're under attack," shouted one of the crew members. Unknown energy source detected. Graves quickly assessed the situation. The Rillian wasn't badly damaged, but this wasn't some random space debris. Someone on Earth had fired on them. And from the look of the damage, it was clear the humans had advanced far beyond what the Council had imagined. "Initiate evasive maneuvers. Get us out of range." Graves barked, her mind racing. She knew this wasn't just a warning shot. It was a message. A clear one. But from whom? The Rillian managed to stabilize itself as Graves ordered a retreat, but as the ship turned to break orbit, something far more alarming occurred. A massive, heavily armed warship appeared on their sensors. It was far larger than anything the Council had ever seen, dwarfing even the largest of their dreadnoughts. A blinding flash lit up the screen as the warship powered up its weapons. Confirmed, Earth warship. The Aegis. They've been hiding this for years. Graves' stomach dropped. The Aegis, the flagship of Earth's military forces. But its design was unlike anything she had imagined. A gargantuan, angular vessel bristling with cutting-edge weaponry. It had only recently been detected by the Council's most sophisticated surveillance networks, and they had dismissed it as a minor project. No longer. The warship fired again, this time launching a barrage of quantum disruptor beams. The Rillian shook violently as its shields faltered under the intensity of the human weaponry. In the space of a few moments, the once mighty Council delegation was left reeling. The energy blasts from the Aegis had crippled the Rillian systems, knocking out vital life support functions and communications. But the real shock came when the Aegis deployed a secondary weapon, a kinetic bombardment satellite that dropped from orbit. In an instant, a series of bright flashes erupted across the sky over Earth's surface. The Krill fleet, which had been lurking at the edge of the solar system, was caught off guard. In a matter of moments, their ships, large, imposing, and heavily armoured, were torn apart by the destructive force of the human weaponry. The delegation aboard the Rillian watched in disbelief as the human warship's firepower obliterated the approaching Krill fleet in a matter of minutes. Entire ships were reduced to debris, and the rest scattered into retreat. The Aegis had just demonstrated the power humanity now commanded. "We've made a grave mistake," murmured one of the Zerothians, staring at the devastation on the view screen. "This is no longer a species we can control." Graves stood silent, her mind reeling. The humans had sent a message, all right, one far more potent than anyone in the Galactic Council had ever expected. Earth was no longer a wild card. It was a power to be reckoned with. As the Rillian limped back into orbit, the Council representatives exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't a minor skirmish anymore. The game had changed. This continuation moves the story into the action, showing how the humans, caught in a long-running conflict with the Krill, are ready to assert themselves on the galactic stage. It also sets up the Council's miscalculation, creating the tension that will unfold in the coming parts of the story. Back on Elysium Station, the Galactic Council was in turmoil. The Reliant, the delegation's flagship, had barely limped back to orbit, its hull scorched and systems compromised. A tense silence hung in the air as Council members processed the reports coming in from Earth and the Outer Rim. What had seemed like a simple diplomatic mission had turned into a galactic crisis. High Chancellor Marloan of the Tour stood at the front of the chamber, her normally serene expression now strained with disbelief. She had witnessed firsthand the power of the Aegis, humanity's new warship. The Krill, once feared across the galaxy for their brutality and advanced technology, had been annihilated in mere minutes by Earth's weapons. She had never imagined that humanity could possess such capabilities. The reports of Earth's military advancements had been exaggerated, surely, or so they thought. "I told you we were underestimating them," Captain Elena Graves said, her voice tight with frustration as she addressed the assembly. Graves had barely escaped Earth with her life, and the terror of that near miss had yet to fade. Her hands shook slightly as she stood before the Council, but her composure was still intact. "The Aegis, that ship is unlike anything we've ever encountered. Humanity is no longer the fractured, desperate species we thought they were. They've become a force we cannot ignore." "The Aegis is merely the tip of the iceberg," said Roland, the Acronian delegate, his 4 spiny limbs tapping nervously on the smooth surface of his podium. "Their weaponry, their technological innovations, this is not the work of a species at war with itself. Earth has been preparing for something. And now we know they've been working in secret, while the Council bickered over minor issues. They've been hiding their true capabilities," Marloan murmured, her antennae twitching. "This cannot be allowed to continue. Earth must be brought back into line before they pose a greater threat to the galaxy." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber, but it was quickly silenced by the voice of Admiral Vranik, the Selverian representative. His face was grim, his sharp, alien features set in a tight scowl. "We cannot underestimate this threat. The Krill were beaten by them in less than an hour. If Earth chooses to continue its expansion, no one in this Council can stop them." Marloan's voice was low but firm. "We cannot allow a rogue power to rise unchecked. The balance of power in the galaxy is delicate. If the humans continue to grow unchecked, they could destabilize everything. The peace we've maintained for centuries could be shattered." "Then what do you propose?" asked Thalra, the Androthian delegate. His large, iridescent eyes flickered with unease. "They are not as easily manipulated as other species. They will not simply bow to the Council's demands. There is one option left to us," Vranik said, his voice cold and calculated. "We crush them now, before they grow any stronger. We send a force to Earth with enough firepower to remind them who truly holds the power." The room fell silent. The idea was radical, even for Vranik, whose militaristic tendencies were well known. But the suggestion hung in the air like a thick, heavy fog. To attack Earth now, before they could solidify their position, was the only way to preserve the status quo. The Council couldn't risk waiting to see what humanity's next move would be. "I agree with Admiral Vranik," said Marloan after a long pause. "We cannot afford to let this situation fester. Earth is no longer a chaotic, fractured planet. We must act before they shift the balance of the galaxy in their favor." Graves felt a chill run through her. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, but she held her ground. She had never doubted the capability of humanity, but hearing it from the Council made her stomach churn. Earth wasn't ready for galactic war, not on this scale. They will not bend to threats or manipulation, she said softly. But there is another way. What do you suggest? Fowler asked, leaning forward. I can go back to Earth, Graves said, her voice gaining strength. I'll bring them an offer they can't refuse. We don't need to fight a war. We need to understand what drives them. They have been prepared for something far larger than us. Perhaps we can use that to our advantage, broker an alliance. Marlan considered this for a moment. The suggestion was risky, but it was better than direct conflict. An alliance? She echoed, almost as if the word itself was foreign on her tongue. With Earth? Graves nodded. Their technology is far beyond anything we thought possible. Their willingness to stand up to the Krill shows they are prepared for something we don't fully understand. But we cannot just impose our will on them. We must offer them something in return, something that acknowledges their newfound power. The Council debated this for hours, but in the end they agreed. Graves would return to Earth to offer President Talbot and his government a seat at the table, on the condition that Earth accepts some form of oversight and integration into the broader galactic order. The Council, for all their arrogance, had underestimated humanity's will to survive. Now they had to find a way to manipulate it to their advantage. But as Graves left the council chambers, she couldn't shake the knowing feeling that humanity would not fall in line so easily. Earth had just shown the galaxy what it was capable of, and there was no going back. Whatever the council decided, the future of the galaxy was now in humanity's hands. This part intensifies the political stakes, with the Galactic Council struggling to contain the newly discovered threat posed by humanity. The internal conflict among the Council's members, their misjudgment of Earth's power, and the brewing tension over how to deal with humanity's rise to power are all brought to the forefront. Graves' role as a potential negotiator offers a glimpse of the precarious diplomacy that lies ahead. In the war room of Earth's Global Command Center, the mood was heavy with anticipation. President Jake Talbot had just received the latest intelligence from the Rillians' return. The Galactic Council had already sent their response. A diplomatic mission, led by Captain Elena Graves, was on its way back to Earth with an offer, one that would likely be as condescending as it was coercive. But Talbot knew the truth. The Council's fragile sense of security was being tested by Earth's unexpected rise, and if humanity didn't act swiftly, they would be suffocated by bureaucracy and politics, left with nothing but the Council's ultimatums. Standing at the center of the war room, General Jack Langley, veteran of several conflicts and commander of Earth's combined military forces, studied the holographic map of the galaxy. His dark, weathered face remained impassive, but the lines around his eyes betrayed the weight of the decisions before him. Earth's military was powerful, more so than most species realized, but the risks of taking on the Galactic Council and the Krill in full force were immense. Still, Langley had long ago learned to trust his instincts, and right now, his instincts were telling him that humanity had to push forward. There was no turning back. "General," Talbot said, stepping up behind him, "what do we do now? The Council's envoy is on its way, and they'll likely bring an offer we can't trust, but their fleet could be right behind it. We're running out of time." Langley turned to face the president, his eyes sharp with resolve. "I've been thinking about that. If we wait for the Council to come to us, we're playing into their hands. They'll try to bargain with us, threaten us with sanctions, or worse, force us to submit to their so-called peace treaties." "Then what do you suggest, General?" Talbot asked. Langley's lips curled into a grim smile. "We don't wait for them to come to us. We take the fight to them." A ripple of unease passed through the room, as Earth's top military officers exchanged uncertain glances. Talbot raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we start a war with the entire galaxy?" "We don't start wars, Mr. President," Langley replied, his voice low and steady. "But we end them. We need to show the Council, and every other empire in this galaxy, that Earth will not bow to anyone, no matter how powerful they are. Not the Krill, not the Council, not anyone." Langley stepped over to a large projection table, where a 3D map of the galaxy rotated slowly. His finger traced over Earth's position, then over the borders of the outer rim, where the Krill had made their moves in recent months. "We've already begun to fortify our outer defenses and build up fleets in the area. The Aegis and our remaining ships are ready, but we need to strike first. If we can destroy the Krill's central command and cripple their fleet, we send a message to the Council that we are not to be ignored." "And the Council?" Talbot asked, his voice measured. "They'll come after us," Langley said, "but they won't be able to match what we're about to do. The Aegis can break their fleets, and we have new weapons in development. Disruptors, antimatter torpedoes, things they won't see coming." "Is it worth the risk?" Talbot asked, his tone more serious than ever. "We're talking about fighting not just the Krill, but the entire Galactic Council, if we fail." "We won't fail," Langley interjected, cutting him off. "We'll hit them where they least expect it. If we destroy the Krill, the Council will be forced to negotiate on our terms. But we cannot show weakness, Mr. President. Not now. We've been underestimated for too long. It's time to show them what Earth is capable of." Talbot took a deep breath, looking out at the officers in the room. He knew Langley was right. The Council had seen Earth as a fledgling power, a world too fractured to pose a threat. The last thing they expected was for humanity to unite, to pull ahead of them technologically, and to seize the opportunity to reshape the galaxy. But Talbot also knew the consequences of this path. Starting a war with the Galactic Council would put everything at risk: his people, his planet, and the future of human civilization. "Prepare for launch," Talbot said finally, his voice steady. "I'm giving you the green light, General. Do what needs to be done. And make sure the Council knows that Earth is not afraid." Langley nodded, his face grim but resolute. It's time they learned that the galaxy is no longer their playground. As Langley turned to leave the war room, he paused, glancing at the stars outside the viewport. The decision to go on the offensive was a dangerous one, but there was no other choice. If humanity wanted to remain free, they would have to take the fight to their enemies, both the Krill and the Council. He made his way to the Aegis, humanity's greatest weapon and symbol of their newfound strength. As he boarded the ship, the crew was already preparing for launch, their faces lit with determination. This wasn't just a military operation, it was the dawn of a new era. An era where Earth would no longer be a pawn in galactic politics. The ship's engines roared to life as Langley took his seat at the helm. The stars stretched before them, vast and unyielding, but humanity was no longer the small, insignificant species at the edge of the galaxy. Earth had arrived, and now the galaxy would have to reckon with them. This part expands on Earth's strategy under General Langley's leadership, showing the military's preparation for an offensive strike against both the Krill and the Galactic Council. It sets the stage for the upcoming battle, with the stakes raised higher for humanity's future. Langley's bold approach to securing Earth's freedom emphasizes humanity's unwillingness to be dominated or ignored, marking a pivotal moment in the narrative. The Aegis tore through the blackness of space, its engines humming with controlled power. General Langley stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the stars. His mind was sharp, focused, The countdown had begun. In just a few hours, the fleet would reach the Krill's last known stronghold. And with it, Earth would strike first. For years, Earth had been a passive player in the galaxy's grand chessboard. But now humanity had chosen to make its move, and there would be no turning back. The Aegis was the spearhead of that move. It was humanity's first true warship, capable of overwhelming the Krill fleet with its raw power and sophisticated weaponry. Behind Langley, his officers were finalizing the mission parameters. They were preparing for an attack that would destabilize the galaxy, a blow that would echo across the stars. Earth would destroy the Krill's central command, cutting off their ability to wage war and ensuring that the Galactic Council would have no excuse to ignore humanity's rise. "General," Lieutenant Jameson called from his console, his voice laced with tension. "We just received a transmission from Earth Command. They've detected a significant anomaly in the outer rim. It's a fleet, but identified." Langley's brow furrowed. He turned sharply. "What do you mean, unidentified?" "It's unlike anything we've seen," Jameson replied. "They're using a frequency we've never encountered before. No signals, no identification codes, just movement, fast, too fast, and they're heading straight for our position." The words hung in the air like a warning bell. Langley's stomach tightened. The Krill were still a few sectors away. They couldn't have found them this quickly. And if it wasn't the Krill, then ho. "Status report," Langley barked. "Shields are at 80%. Weapons fully primed," Jameson said, his voice strained. "But these ships, they're moving fast, General. Too fast for us to be able to pinpoint their trajectory. We won't have long to react." "Deploy countermeasures," Langley ordered. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers." Before he could issue another command, the ship's warning systems began to shriek, and the deck shuddered beneath their feet. A blinding light flared up on the forward sensor screens, followed by a shockwave that sent the Aegis reeling. "We've been hit. Shields holding." "Barely," yelled the weapons officer. "Report," Langley shouted, gripping the armrest of his chair. "Unknown energy blast. Direct hit to our forward shields." "It's unlike any kinetic weapon we've seen," Jameson answered. "I don't think we're dealing with the Krill." Langley's heart skipped a beat. The Council. Had they already sent a response to Earth's defiance? Or was this something else entirely? "Adjust course," Langley ordered. "We need to identify who's attacking us before we—" Another blast rocked the ship. The lights flickered, and the hull groaned as it endured another impact. "General," came a voice from the communications console. "We've established the source of the attack. It's not the Council. It's Earth. This attack is coming from our planet." Langley froze. "What? Earth? What are you talking about?" The officer hesitated, then replied, "They've activated a deep space weapons platform, Gamma 7. It was built years ago in secret, one of our last-ditch defense initiatives, but it was never." The officer's voice trailed off in disbelief. "It's firing on the Aegis." Langley's mind raced. The platform, Gamma 7, had been a black project, a defense system meant to protect Earth from an enemy that had never come. At least, not until now. The platform was powerful, equipped with a massive energy cannon capable of destroying entire ships. But it had been deactivated for years, hidden deep beneath Earth's surface. How did they? Langley muttered to himself. He couldn't fathom it. The attack came from Earth itself, from a weapon humanity had long buried. Why, who had activated it? "General, the platform is recalibrating," the communications officer continued. It's targeting us again. Langley was shaken. Earth had just shown its hand. They weren't fighting for survival against the Council or the Krill. Someone on Earth, had decided to take matters into their own hands. And that decision had put the Aegis and its entire fleet in the crosshairs. Signal Earth Command. Langley ordered, his voice hard as stone. We need answers now. What the hell is going on down there? The silence that followed was deafening. No response. The Aegis was vulnerable, exposed, and now cut off from Earth's leadership. If this was a rogue faction on Earth, if someone had activated Gamma-7 without authorization, it could mean chaos. A civil war, just when Earth needed to be united against the Council and the Krill. Suddenly, a new transmission appeared on the screen, a video message from Earth. A familiar face. General Langley. President Talbot's voice echoed through the ship's comms. His face was drawn, his eyes weary but resolute. We need to talk. Langley's heart sank. There was something in the President's demeanor that suggested this was no ordinary message. Talbot's tone, the way he held himself, was different from the President Langley had known. There was something darker, more calculated, behind his words. "You've activated Gamma-7?" Langley asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Talbot's gaze flickered, and for a moment, Langley saw a flash of something unfamiliar. Fear. Anger. Maybe both. "It wasn't my decision," Talbot said, his voice low. "There's a faction within Earth's leadership who believes the Council won't listen unless we show them what we're capable of. Gamma-7 is just the beginning. I didn't authorize it, but I can't stop it." Langley's mind braced. A faction. A rogue element within Earth's government. He had thought the decision to strike at the Krill had been made with unity and resolve, but now everything was falling apart. Someone had decided to take Earth's fate into their own hands. And that decision was threatening everything. "Tell me you can call it off, Mr. President," Langley said, his voice tight with urgency. "I wish I could," Talbot replied, "but right now it's out of my hands. You need to get back to Earth. We have bigger problems than the Krill, General. Much bigger." Langley's blood ran cold. What had they unleashed? In this part, we see the stakes escalate dramatically. Earth, once a united front, is now fractured by internal conflict, as a rogue faction activates the long-hidden Gamma-7 weapons platform, threatening not just the Aegis, but the entire mission. Talbot's involvement introduces uncertainty, casting doubt on Earth's unity and its future decisions. Langley, caught in the middle, now has to navigate a fractured Earth and a galaxy on the brink of chaos. The message from President Talbot had left Langley with more questions than answers. As the Aegis continued to drift through space, still under fire from Earth's rogue weapons platform Gamma-7, the reality began to sink in. Earth's political landscape was no longer as stable as it seemed. The rogue faction that had activated the platform was not just acting out of fear or desperation. They were part of a larger, more dangerous plot. Langley paced the command deck, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something far more insidious was at play. Earth had prepared for intergalactic threats, like the Krill and the Galactic Council, but not this. Not this level of internal betrayal. "General, we've lost another shield sector," Lieutenant Jameson reported. "The next blast will breach our hull if it hits us directly. We need to make a move, or we're not going to make it out of here." Langley glanced at the damage reports flashing across the bridge. The Aegis was built to withstand a lot, but Gamma-7 was designed to cripple ships of its size. There was no way to keep taking hits without serious consequences. But they had no choice. He needed to speak to Talbot. There was still a chance to call off the attack. Or so he hoped. Set course for Earth, Langley ordered, his voice steady despite the rising tension. I'm going to the source. As the crew followed his orders, Langley tapped his comms device. Commander Lawson, take over the bridge. I'm going to Earth Command. No one gets off this ship without my say-so. Lawson gave a sharp nod. Understood, sir. We'll keep the Aegis in one piece until you return. Langley made his way to the shuttle bay, his mind on the message he had received from Talbot. The President had sounded more like a man at the mercy of forces beyond his control, and that worried Langley. If Talbot was being forced into compliance, then someone, or something, was pulling the strings behind the scenes. As the shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere, Langley's thoughts turned darker. Who had the power to turn Earth's greatest defense against itself? Was it a group within the government? Or something deeper, something older? The more he thought about it, the more the pieces didn't add up. The shuttle landed at the heart of Earth Command, a sprawling complex deep underground where humanity's highest-ranking military officers and government officials were stationed. The building's cold, sterile walls felt like the inside of a bunker, a place meant for war and strategy, but something about it felt different today. Langley entered the command center, where Talbot was waiting. The President was standing near the central holographic display, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, his eyes dark with frustration and worry. There was a new heaviness to his posture, a weight that made Langley's instincts flare. "Mr. President," Langley said, approaching him, "I need answers. Gamma 7 wasn't activated by your order. So, who is behind this?" Talbot turned slowly, his face grim. "You're right, General. I didn't authorize it. But the truth is, I don't think anyone in my administration did." Langley's pulse quickened. "What are you saying?" Talbot sighed, his gaze moving to the holographic map of the galaxy. "There's a shadow faction within the government, one that's been growing for years. They've been pulling strings behind the scenes, manipulating the situation for their own purposes. The rise of Earth's military strength, the secrecy around Gamma 7. They've been preparing for this day. And now they've moved, believing that the only way for humanity to survive the galaxy's coming conflicts is to force the Council's hand. They've already destabilized Earth's relations with the Krill, and now they're using Gamma 7 to push us into a confrontation." Langley's mind raced. So they've been plotting this entire time. "Not just plotting," Talbot replied. "They've infiltrated every level of government. Military, intelligence, even parts of the scientific community. And I've been too blind to see it." Langley felt a sickening realization settle over him. Earth had been manipulated by forces within its own borders, by people who were willing to sacrifice everything for their own version of survival. The rogue faction had a plan, one that didn't just involve Earth's defense, but its domination. "What's their goal?" Langley asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Complete autonomy," Talbot answered, his tone dark. "They want to pull Earth out of the Council altogether, to declare our independence from the galaxy's politics. They think that the only way for humanity to survive in the long term is to fight for ourselves, no matter the cost. And right now, they believe the only way to do that is through a war with the Council." Langley's chest tightened. The idea of a galactic war, with Earth at the center, was a nightmare. It would decimate humanity's resources and ensure that every faction in the galaxy would come down on Earth. But the rogue faction had their own vision, one that placed Earth's future in direct opposition to the rest of the galaxy. "I need to stop them," Talbot said, his voice low. "But they've gone too far. They're in control of the Gamma 7 platform. and they'd locked me out of all major military decisions. Langley stepped forward. Then we have no choice. We have to take Gamma 7 offline, but I'll need your help. The rogue faction won't just let us do that. They'll fight back. I know, Talbot said, nodding. But I can't stop them alone. We'll need to gather support from the loyalists in the military, from Earth's leaders who still want peace. If we don't act fast, they'll push us into a war we can't win. Langley's mind was already working. A covert operation, a tactical strike against the rogue elements. But time was running out. He needed to act quickly before Earth's fate was sealed. The clock's ticking, Mr. President, Langley said. Let's move. In this part, we see the plot behind Earth's internal crisis unfold. The rogue faction, now revealed, has been manipulating events for years, seeking to push Earth into a confrontation with the Galactic Council. Langley and Talbot must work together to stop the rogue elements and prevent a full-scale galactic war, one that could destroy everything they've worked for. This chapter deepens the mystery and sets the stage for the confrontation ahead. The tension in Earth Command was palpable. General Langley stood with his arms crossed, staring at the holographic map of Earth's defense network, where Gamma 7 was still locked in combat with the Aegis. The rogue faction had made their move. Their hold over Earth's military assets had grown to the point where they now controlled not just Gamma 7, but the majority of the planet's advanced weapon systems. Langley's mind worked quickly, running through options. A tactical strike would be the fastest way to disable the rogue faction's strongholds, but it came with a massive risk. Gamma 7 was a weapon of last resort, capable of taking down entire fleets with a single blast. The rogue faction knew that, and they were willing to use it on Earth's own forces if necessary. President Talbot entered the war room, his face set in grim determination. His eyes met Langley's, and for the first time since the crisis began, Langley saw a man who had lost control, not of his will, but of the situation itself. The loyalists are in place, Talbot said, his voice strained. We've got a few key military factions who still back the legitimate government, but it's not enough. The rogue faction is too entrenched. They've got Gamma 7 on full alert, and they're ready to use it on anyone who gets in their way. We don't have time, Langley replied, his mind calculating the odds. If we don't act now, the Aegis will be destroyed, and once Gamma 7 takes out our fleet, they'll have control of the planet. We're looking at a total lockdown of Earth's military and resources. Talbot clenched his fists. What's the plan? Langley pointed to the map. We're going to hit their command center. A small strike team, no more than 30, can infiltrate the facility and take out their control systems. We'll need to access the central core to shut down Gamma 7 before they can fire again. We don't have a way in, Talbot said, shaking his head. The rogue faction has fortified every entry point. Gamma 7 is buried deep beneath the surface. It's a fortress. Then we make our own way in, Langley said, his voice a low growl. I'll take the Aegis into Earth's atmosphere. We'll create a distraction. While they're focused on the ship, your loyalists can move in and disable the outer defences. After that, we'll make our way to the core. Talbot looked at him, skepticism and desperation written across his face. And what if they fire Gamma 7 before we can get there? Langley's expression hardened. We don't give them the chance. In the belly of the Aegis, Langley's team prepared for what would be one of the most dangerous operations in human history. As they suited up for the mission, the weight of what they were about to do hung heavily in the air. They weren't just infiltrating a government facility. They were up against Earth's own military forces, men and women who had turned their allegiance against their own planet. "General, we're ready," Commander Lawson said as Langley entered the shuttle bay, the ship's personnel finalizing the mission's launch sequence. Langley nodded. "Once we hit the atmosphere, we'll break through their perimeter defenses and draw their attention. The Aegis will take the hits, but it's tough enough to survive the barrage. You'll have 2 hours to reach the core before the facility goes into lockdown." A soldier handed him a sleek, black visor helmet, a tactical tool designed to interface directly with the Aegis weapons systems. Langley secured the helmet, locking it into place, and turned to Lawson. "Give me a heads up if anything goes wrong." "I'm counting on you." Lawson saluted. "Understood, sir. Good luck." With a final glance at Talbot, Langley boarded the transport shuttle. As it began to ascend, the familiar hum of the Aegis engines filled his ears. Below, the Earth's atmosphere shimmered against the shuttle's viewport. In the distance, Langley could see the outlines of Earth Command's heavily fortified sectors. The rogue faction had created a labyrinth of defenses, but Langley was determined to breach them. As the shuttle broke through the upper layers of the atmosphere, Langley's voice crackled through the comms. "Launch the decoys. It's time to draw their fire." The team had already prepped multiple drones, highly advanced decoys capable of mimicking the signature of the Aegis. As they shot off into the atmosphere, Langley could see the enemy forces on Earth's surface begin to react. Tactical interceptors launched into the air, scrambling to deal with the incoming threat. "Here we go," Langley muttered to himself. The Aegis fired its thrusters and descended toward Earth's surface, sending shockwaves through the rogue faction's perimeter. The decoys did their job, drawing the fire and attention of Earth Command's defenders. But Langley's shuttle pushed through, straight for the command center buried deep within the planet's crust. "I've got a lock on the facility's entrance," said Lieutenant Jameson from the bridge of the Aegis. "Coordinates are locked in, General." Langley's team fastened their harnesses as the shuttle descended even further, piercing through Earth's atmosphere like a meteor. Below them, the rogue faction's forces scrambled to intercept. This was their last chance to stop Gamma 7 from destroying the fleet, and Langley knew they were running out of time. Just as they approached the heavily defended entry point to the rogue faction's base, the Aegis came under a barrage of fire from surface-to-air cannons. The shuttle rocked with each impact, but Langley's team held steady. "We're almost there," Langley said, his voice resolute. With a final thrust, the shuttle veered through the last wave of defensive fire and descended toward the complex. The ground shook as the shuttle landed with a thud, and Langley's team was the first to jump into the fray. The battle was just beginning. In this part, Langley and President Talbot moved forward with a desperate plan to shut down Gamma 7 and prevent Earth from spiraling into civil war. The urgency of the operation is underscored by Langley's tactical genius and the danger they're facing, both from the rogue faction and the clock ticking down on the fate of Earth and the Aegis. The chapter sets the stage for a high-stakes confrontation as Langley's team makes their move to infiltrate and disable the rogue faction's stronghold. The shuttle's doors opened with a hiss, and the team spilled into the cold, sterile hallways of the rogue faction's command facility. The air was thick with tension. Langley's boots clattered against the metal floors, the sound echoing off the walls of the underground complex. The walls themselves were reinforced, designed to withstand a direct assault. But Langley wasn't here for a fight with the building itself. He was after something far more dangerous. Gamma 7. "Move out, stay sharp," Langley ordered, his voice low but firm. His eyes scanned the surroundings as his team fanned out, weapons drawn. The rogue faction had fortified this place for years, anticipating an uprising like this, but Langley's team had the element of surprise. As they moved deeper into the facility, Langley's thoughts flashed back to the stakes. The Aegis had already taken significant damage. Each minute they waited allowed the rogue faction more time to activate Gamma 7, and the weapon was capable of destroying not just the fleet, but anything within a 100-mile radius of its blast. "We're approaching the core," said Sergeant Daniels, the team's tech specialist, as he scanned his handheld terminal. "This way." The sound of distant footsteps echoed in the halls, and Langley motioned for the team to stop. "Keep your heads down. They'll be on high alert now. We can't afford to get caught." A soft hiss came from the hallway ahead, and Langley's instincts flared. He didn't hesitate. He waved his hand in the air, signaling for his team to split. The sound of heavy boots grew louder. The team moved quickly to the side, taking cover behind columns and reinforced barricades as enemy soldiers rounded the corner. Without a word, Langley raised his rifle and fired, the sound deafening in the narrow corridor. The first two soldiers dropped immediately, but a third returned fire. Langley ducked and rolled, finding new cover behind a structural support. His team quickly engaged, and within moments, the rogue faction's patrol was neutralized. "We don't have much time," Langley said, breathing heavily as he crouched down to reload. "Move out." They reached the inner sanctum of the control room, where Gamma 7 was housed. The massive machine loomed in the center of the room, an enormous energy cannon capable of launching devastating blasts across the planet's surface. The chamber was filled with technicians, all of whom stopped and stared in shock as Langley and his team stormed in. One of the technicians, a young woman, backed away slowly, hands raised in surrender. "You don't know what you're doing," she said, her voice trembling. "If you deactivate Gamma 7, you'll trigger a fail-safe. Everything will go offline. The whole system will collapse." Langley didn't hesitate. "Then we'll take our chances." Sergeant Daniels moved quickly to a console, fingers flying across the keys. "I'm in, but I need a minute to override their security." Langley stood guard, scanning the room for any signs of movement. Outside the control room, he could hear the distant sounds of reinforcements approaching. They didn't have long before the entire complex would be crawling with enemy soldiers. His heart pounded in his chest. "I'm almost there," Daniels muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked the console. Suddenly, a loud clatter sounded from the hallway. Footsteps grew louder and more rapid. Langley cursed under his breath. Reinforcements were closing in faster than expected. He motioned for the team to take defensive positions, and within moments they were surrounded by a dozen armed rogue soldiers. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek, stepped forward, his pistol aimed directly at Langley. "You think you can just waltz in here and deactivate Gamma 7? The leader sneered. "You're too late. We've already won." Langley's grip tightened on his rifle. "If you think that weapon is going to save you, you're wrong. It's already tearing apart your own people, and it's not going to stop there. Your faction has already lost, but if you want to make a stand, I'm happy to oblige." The leader's eyes narrowed, but before he could give the order to fire, a loud crackling sound filled the room, followed by a tremendous explosion. The facility shook violently, and the lights flickered. Daniels turned, his face pale. "General, we've got a bigger problem. Gamma 7 is going critical. I'm trying to stop it, but the system is overriding my commands. We have to get out, now." Langley's eyes widened as the room began to tremble. He grabbed Daniels by the arm, pulling him back toward the exit. "Move. Now." The rogue soldiers hesitated, uncertain whether to continue their assault or retreat. But as the walls continued to shake, they made a split-second decision, running for the exits. Langley didn't wait to see if they had stayed. His priority was clear: survival. He and his team ran through the hallways, barely avoiding a second massive explosion. The entire complex was coming down around them. It was clear now that the rogue faction had designed Gamma-7 not only to be a weapon, but also to serve as a failsafe. If their control over it was threatened, they'd rather destroy the facility and everyone inside it. "Get to the shuttle," Langley barked as they sprinted toward the surface. The shaking grew worse, and a sound of crumbling metal reverberated through the structure. They had mere minutes before the facility collapsed entirely. Just as Langley and his team reached the surface, the final blast hit. The sky above them cracked open with a flash of blinding light as Gamma-7 went off prematurely, sending a shockwave rippling across the landscape. The Aegis, still hovering in low orbit, took the brunt of the shockwave, but remained intact. The shuttle took off just as the base was obliterated. The force of the explosion sent them hurtling into the sky, but Langley's hands were steady on the controls. "Status report," Langley said, turning to his team. "We're clear," Daniel said, his voice shaky but relieved. "Gamma-7 is offline. The facility's gone. It's over." Langley looked back toward Earth, a flicker of hope rising within him. The rogue faction had been stopped. The war they'd wanted to spark would not come to pass, not today. But the future of humanity was still uncertain, and the price for peace had been steep. "We won the battle," Langley said quietly, "but the real fight is just beginning." As they ascended into the sky, the Earth stretched out below them, a planet scarred, but still holding on. In this final chapter, Langley's team successfully infiltrates the rogue faction's stronghold and deactivates Gamma-7, preventing an all-out war. However, the rogue faction's desperation triggers a catastrophic failure of the facility, forcing a dramatic escape. With the mission complete and Gamma-7 neutralized, the battle for Earth's future isn't over. It's only just beginning. Langley and his team have secured a fragile peace, but the political landscape remains fractured. Earth's place in the galaxy is still uncertain, and the consequences of the rogue faction's actions will echo for years to come.